The universe operates on a strict set of immutable, objective laws. For any organizational text to claim it serves as a universal manual, its internal architecture must reflect that same consistency. Every rule and every parameter must align without logical contradiction. This schematic represents a rigid, impenetrable legal boundary established in Surah An-Nisa, verse 4:3. This verse sets regulated, strict limits on domestic, biological marriage, specifically tying it to the protection of orphans. It creates a closed system with absolute rules. Traditional historical narratives surrounding Surah Al-Ahzab, verse 33-37, introduce a critical conflict. These external accounts claim the verse allows a leader to take the biological wife of his adopted son, creating a legal exception that stands in direct opposition to the boundaries established in Chapter 4. If a legal framework enforces strict boundaries for the public while granting exceptions to its leaders, it suffers a total structural failure. A universal legal framework cannot sustain its own weight if its primary laws are self-contradicting. Resolving this paradox requires bypassing historical narratives and corrupted translation data to examine the precise alphanumeric source code of the original Arabic text. Fixing the system error requires isolating two distinct conceptual variables that have merged into a single definition over centuries of semantic decay. This diagram shows a closed container forming around a central glowing node. This represents the Arabic root nikah, spelled nun, kaf, ha. This is the precise legal structure of biological marriage and domestic containment utilized in Chapter 4, verse 3. The text in verse 33-37 utilizes a different variable, zawj, zai, waw, jim. This term represents a functional pairing or a coupled professional responsibility. It describes two elements linking together to coordinate a specific task. This functional definition is verified in Chapter 81, verse 7, which describes souls being paired or sorted into groups. As these nodes multiply and sort into synchronized pairs, the turn operates as a grouping mechanism, independent of biological weddings. Replacing the corrupted concept of marriage with the precise variable of paired responsibility changes the functional parameters of the entire event. The Atomic Semantic Extraction Protocol decodes the term Zayd as a specific systemic state within the text, rather than an arbitrary human name. The first alphanumeric prime, za, represents the foundational principle of intense force and rapid spatial displacement. It is a high-energy push that cuts through an existing boundary. The second prime, ya, provides the principle of active flow, allowing the continuous transmission of energy through the vector established by the za. The third prime, dal, establishes the principle of structural containment. It anchors the expanded entry point, creating a new, larger boundary for the system. The synthesized ZYD formula represents the alphanumeric calculation for incremental growth, systemic expansion, or surpassing a baseline. In an administrative context, a growth phase requires a specific agent to manage the expansion. The text assigns this role to Zayd, the operational component or expansion team responsible for the growth phase. Initially, a leader delegates a specific project or Zawj to this team. Once the expansion phase completes its task, the Zayd component has fulfilled its requirement. The overarching system then reattaches the responsibility directly back to the central authority for final oversight. This sequence maps a three-stage administrative transfer of power and responsibility, providing a blueprint for modern organizational management. The text documents a final anomaly, the leader's discomfort and fear of public resistance during this power transfer. This friction is a byproduct of the intense social taboo a leader faces when reabsorbing a task previously handled by a subordinate branch or an adopted unit. Public perception misinterprets this recentralization of power as micromanagement. When a manager reabsorbs a completed project, it demonstrates an efficient return to core oversight. The system corrects this by establishing that an effective leader must execute organizational realignment for the greater good, following objective laws rather than public opinion. Because the sequence describes an operational transfer rather than a domestic union, the protective limits of Chapter 4, verse 3 remain unviolated. By debugging the semantic decay, the paradox is resolved. the text emerges as an internally consistent blueprint for modern institutional transparency and administrative realignment.